So we're now going to wrap up our discussion of key combining operators that are part of the observable class. And in this case, we're going to talk about collectInto and collect, which create a single from multiple sources or iterations. So let's take a look at collectInto first. This operator collects items emitted by the finite source observable into a single mutable data structure. And the first parameter that you pass here is the mutable data structure that accumulates or collects the items. So you typically want to give an instance of something that will be a mutable result collector. In this case, as you can see, we're going to make a new array list. So we're going to collect into an array list. And then the second parameter is a by consumer that takes the accumulator, in this case an array list, and simply adds a value to it that was emitted by the operator. So this accumulator is modified. That's why it's a mutable result container. Once again, demonstrating the use of mutable types in the context of reactive programming, which is perfectly fine because you're going to be using this in a way that doesn't have race conditions, so that's good. What comes back from collectInto is a single that emits the result that came out of the collection. In this case, it would emit the list. It would emit the values that were accumulated into the list. You can think of collectInto as a somewhat simplified version of the reduce operator we looked at that doesn't need to pass or need to return the state on each pass through it. Here's a simple example. What we're going to do here is we're going to take a list of big fractions. We're going to do the flat map concurrency idiom to multiply them together. If something went wrong, we're going to end up getting a 0 out of that, among other values. So what we're going to do is we're going to filter out anything that has the value 0. So we're going to get rid of anything that's 0. And then the final thing we're going to do is we're going to collect all the non-zero values into an array list. And that's what's going to come back. It'll be a single to a list. Project Reactor has something called collect that works essentially the same way that collectInto does. It's just a little cleaner, and it's based on the collect framework from modern Java. And interestingly enough, there's also a flux collect list that is more narrowly focused than collect because it's only going to collect into a list. So that's very much like the collectInto method if you were to pass it a list as the accumulator. And all this stuff is very similar to Java Streams collect, where you could use a list, you can use a set, you can use a map, all kinds of things you can use there. So these are all sort of variations on a theme between the different frameworks. Let's now talk about the collect operator. And the collect operator is intentionally designed to be very similar to the collect operator that comes out of Java Streams with a few little tweaks because, of course, this is reactive programming, so we have to be different somehow. So the collect operator collects the upstream values into a container, and the parameter that's passed into here is a collector. So this is pretty much the same collector that you come to know and love from Java Streams. And it defines various factory methods like supplier, accumulator, finisher, and so on that, again, you would be familiar with if you used Streams before. So this actually makes it very easy to integrate Streams-like collectors into RxJava. It returns a single that emits the container that's collected by the collector, by the finishing of the collector. Once again, this is basically a simplified version of reduce that doesn't have to return the state on each pass. And here's a simple example. We're going to generate a bunch of values up to a certain amount. We're going to do the concurrency idiom on them, the RxJava flat map concurrency idiom. And then we're going to collect the results into a list. And then we're going to do some stuff with that list when we're all done. Not surprisingly, collect is very similar to observable collectInto. It just uses a collector as opposed to having to pass in the accumulator and the function that will basically sum things together or add things together or whatever. Project Reactor has a collect operator that works essentially the same way that the collect operator works in RxJava. In fact, I would have to go back and look in more detail, but I get the feeling that RxJava's implementation of collect was probably inspired by Project Reactor's implementation of collect, even though RxJava came out first, because I think they realized that was a useful thing to add. And again, flux collect list is a more concise but a more limited way of getting a list back. And this is all very similar to the collect method in Java Streams. So just for kicks, I chose a slightly different example from what we had before. We make ourselves a list of numbers with duplicates in it. We get rid of everything that is odd, and then we collect all the even numbered integers into a set. So we got rid of duplicates. So that's just showing how you could do the same sort of thing in Java streams. Okay, so that's the end of our discussion about combining operators.